In this next selection, you see me presenting to a workshop the Great Turning, the name that more and more of us are using to describe the revolution that is taking place now, the shift from the industrial growth society to a life-sustaining society. This is the context of our lives, and to take part in it, the adventure of our time, a privilege that is ours. As you prepare to facilitate this work, ground yourself in an awareness of this adventure, this third revolution of our species, following on and of comparable magnitude to the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution. And because it is largely unreported in the corporate-controlled media, we need to use the workshops and use the work that reconnects to help us familiarize each other with this context so that we can see it in action in our lives. I tend now to put it toward the beginning of the workshop, often in the gratitude part, following on the expressions of sources of personal gratitude in our lives. And then I will shift and say, let's look at what we can be grateful for collectively. This is so important that I want you to really be as familiar as you can with it. And the presentation that is in our book, Coming Back to Life, is in the first chapter, and become acquainted with it, comfortable with the notion, so that you learn to see this phenomenon and its three interdependent dimensions in the world around you. Because naming it, recognizing it, helps us to realize it, both in the sense of knowing and making real. Okay, I just want to review with you what you, and point out certain key things that are in the concept of the Great Turning. It's in the first chapter of the book. You've read it, you know it, you've heard me talk about it. And, but I want us to look at it together, because it is a conceptualization, it is a framework for our perceptions of what is going on in our world that can make a huge amount of difference to our sanity and our good spirits, keep us from throwing in the towel. And that is the fact that there is a revolution going on, and that thinkers like Dana Meadows and Lester Brown and David Corton and Elizabeth Soturas and so on, see that what we have now is a shift, a transformational moment in human history that is similar in scope and magnitude to two previous revolutions. So this, and that this is the third revolution of comparable magnitude. So all of this is in the book. All you need is to take it in with the cells of your body. So what was the first revolution? Agriculture. Yeah, and that took centuries. And the second, that was that big in terms of how it changed human life, was the Industrial Revolution. It started just 200 years ago in England. And right on the heels of that comes this, so I know they have different names for it. Lester Brown called it the environmental revolution and the ecological revolution. Dana Meadows called it the sustainability revolution, but more and more of us are simply calling it the Great Turning. And that phrase actually came out of what it, first of all, in my experience, it's come out of work with the future beings. Because when we get into role plays and dyadic work using the moral imagination with future beings, and they seem to talk about it that way. But other people are using, who haven't done our deep time work, use the phrase the great turning also for this. And this revolution has to happen much faster than the other two. And at the same time has to be more thoroughgoing. Because it's not just the institutions and technologies, but it's the whole mindset of who and what we are in relation to the planet, that we are a living part of a living planet, and that says everything about our what we're about and what we need and how we relate to each other. So it's an incredible time to be alive. So that's another reason why I just want to anchor this concept of the great turning in you, because it's a source of not just comfort, as I said first, but of a sense of tremendous privilege and excitement. And one of the things that it's, so I want to put it up like this. We have, we can present it as being the transition from the industrial growth society to a life-sustaining society. And this phrasing here is drawn from the Norwegian deep ecologist Sigmund Freud, who uses it, and it says it all, and it hinges on this pivotal concept, what determines the nature of this political economy, how it sets its goals, how it measures its success, is in terms of how it grows, how fast it grows, and grows in what? Health, longevity, wisdom, beauty and grace in the eyes of God. I mean, what?
Numbers of redwoods.
What?
Numbers of redwoods.
Yeah, all right. That'd be a good one. Yeah. Resilience of the mycorrhizae. What does it want to grow in?
Cash.
Money.
Profit.
Yeah, profit. Exactly.
Dissatisfaction.
And whose profit? Mine? Land of Medicine Buddha? Corporate. So it's that one. This is, so that right away shows you that this, from the system's point of view, that this is a doomed political economy. It's a doomed system on runaway because it is seeking to maximize one part of it. And once you do that with any system, once you try to maximize one part, then everything goes out of whack and it begins to devour itself for the sake of, as John Seed quoted somebody saying, it's like in our bodies, the brain decided it would feed off the liver and mine the liver. You know, the whole thing goes out of whack. Once you try to maximize one part, then you can't have balance, which means you can't have sustainability. So the pathetic thing here is that it's not only that it has to keep on growing in corporate profits, but that the rate of growth has to keep on growing. And that rate of growth is actually measured this quarter against last quarter against the same quarter a year ago. And unless it shows an upward trend, people are gnashing their teeth and tearing their hair and making other sacrifices for that. So this is what is called, so this is self-destructive. And I find that, I want to ask Fran to speak to that. I heard him explain this in Sri Lanka recently, and I understood things I hadn't before. But I wanted just a reminder of what it does to our psyches as change agents allied with the long-term health of Earth. That's why we're here. That's why we've been given this incredible opportunity to learn and see things. And some of them hurt like hell, but it's important for us to see them. We're here to for life to go on. And it helps a lot to see that we don't need to direct a lot of attention to destroying the industrial growth society, because it's doing that job itself, probably better than we could. Do you see the importance of psycho-spiritual orientation? It can take the kind of pissiness out of our attitude and replace it with a kind of compassionate, oh, how can we manage sort of a gentler collapse? It's in collapse. It is in collapse. So we want to help it collapse in ways that are less destructive of all forms of life. So it's makes it easier for us to live with ourselves, you know. Is there something you'd like to,
I would, yeah.
if I can call on you, my pet?
I think it's hard when we talk to people who depend on the industrial corporate system for food, for housing, for transport, for even the books that are published, to imagine that all of this is in a stage of self-destruction. It helps me to talk to people about that and to talk to myself about that, to realize that this system is built on a huge fallacy, on a fallacious assumption. So very simplistically, here's our beloved Earth. And we can think of it having resources, and they are finite. They are not infinite, they are finite. And our beloved Earth has a capacity to absorb waste. Into the air, we exhale, right? And there are systems for reprocessing our CO2. Water purifies itself in many bodies. Lake Baikal, some of us love very much. And it's a miracle of self-cleansing with all kinds of biological things I can't possibly understand. So we can handle waste and recycle it, but our capacity is finite. There's only a limited amount of waste our Earth can handle. There's only a limited amount of resources. What resources do we see as being already in collapse? Fisheries. The world fisheries peaked in '79, I think, Edie, wasn't it? And the huge catch. And since then, it's been going down and down and down. Many species are disappearing, have disappeared. The Atlantic salmon have disappeared, etc.
Cropland for grain.
And then cropland. So the Dust Bowl. The Sahara used to be populated by tigers and lions, and it exhausted itself. And because it was finite in its resources. But this assumes infinite growth. There's just an inherent contradiction, an irrationality to assume that every 3 months we have to produce more and therefore consume more. And in the process, of course, we throw away more. Because the whole system is based on the use of resources as fast as possible what is it, planned obsolescence. Was it Veblen that developed that theory? So we take these resources, and we put them into a factory, and we have emissions here, many of which are toxic. We have liquid coming out here, much is toxic, and we have some products, cars and things. And the faster they disintegrate, the better, right? And where do they go? Once we use them up. Our driveway is full of kids' equipment that Julian at 8 years old, our grandson, no longer wants to play with. We don't know what to do with it. Also an old car battery. We don't know what to do with that car battery. It's a throwaway society. But the system depends on cycling through here as fast as possible, faster, faster, more, more, and does not take into account limits. Therefore, I think it was an enormous contribution that the Club of Rome and the Dennis and Dana Meadows and other scholars came up with the notion of limits to what? Growth. Limits to growth. This does not assume that there are limits to growth. That was a radical approach. And when 10 years later they wrote the second book,
20 years later.
or was it 20 years later?
Beyond the limits.
Beyond the limits. So to me, key concepts here are that resources are finite, capability of handling waste is finite, and that, in other words, there are limits on all of that. So sustainability depends on taking those into account. This is unsustainable. It can't last the way it's functioning now. We're burning up our forests, we're eating up our forests, and all the rest.
This leads into that there are different ways of going about and taking part in this transition from the IGS to the life-sustaining society. You can say, you're not thorough enough, or you can get into endless arguments over what is the best strategy. But this is so huge a revolution, so huge a movement, this great turning, that there are perforce many ways of going about it. This is in the book, but in the book, I had to write these on pages, and on a page you have one thing, then another, and which can suggest that one dimension is more important than another, or that they're sequential. So I'd like to put the dimensions of the great turning in terms of flows of causality, how they're mutually supporting, and that so that the most obvious one that we often identify with activism is what we call holding actions. And these are all the actions that slow down the destructiveness of the industrial growth society. So these are everything from soup kitchens to protest marches to tree sittings to legal and legislative campaigns, or for, they say, the Endangered Species Act to slow down the destruction. And these are hard because you have so many defeats along the way. There's some victories that is absolutely essential because it saves some lives and it saves some species, saves some ecosystems, and it saves some of the gene pool. But it's not enough. Same as the gene pool for the life-sustaining society, but it's not enough because the life-sustaining society needs structures, new ways of doing things. So we can put them here. Gaian, I used to write alternative structures and patterns of organizing. But then, and I'll say, why alternative? Let's just say, God, they shouldn't be alternative. They're going to soon not be alternative. So these are new ways of doing things that are coming up at a great rate of speed, sort of like sprouts through the rubble of our dysfunctional civilization. And these are new ways of holding the land, new ways and ancient ways, recapturing ancient ways of growing food, ways of measuring prosperity, ways of distributing food, ways community-supported agriculture, indices of sustainability, new forms of education. What we're doing right here is a new structure. Workshops as ways of people teaching each other and shaping each other's minds and waking each other up. So these are these new patterns. That's not enough for the Great Turning either, because any new structures, patterns will shrivel. They'll die unless they're deeply rooted in our values, in our perceptions of reality, in our belief in what is worthwhile, in our assumptions about the nature of reality. And so that's happening too, in a colossal rate of speed. And I can call this the shift in consciousness. And there's so many parts to this. There's the coming up of new evidence from science and quantum theory, systems theory, chaos theory, holographic theory. There's the wisdom traditions of ancient peoples coming up with very much the same perspective on the intricate interconnectedness of all life patterns. So new ways of seeing the sacred, new forms of spirituality, is the scientific and spiritual revolution. And these areas of the Great Turning are some things that you are, each of you, involved in all three to some extent. But it's good to be able to see that this is a huge shift and that you are part of something epical. This is some might say, the vast and necessary adventure of our time. And I'm absolutely convinced that in a few generations, maybe just 2 generations, they'll look back on us here and say those ancestors at the beginning of the 3rd millennium, 21st century, they were taking part in the Great Turning. Just imagine what it must have been like to be alive then. And another thing that is very important for us to see is that to say that this is going on in no way proclaims a conviction that we're going to win, that this is going to inevitably happen. And it's very important for our spiritual resilience and maturity to recognize how we can fully see something happening, give ourselves to it, and also recognize that it can fail. It's so important because many people today hold themselves back from taking part in social change work because they doubt whether they can make the decisive difference. You probably know some. I see you nodding. Oh yes, well I would certainly come with you to the hearing, or I'll come down and protest out at Lawrence Livermore Lab, but I don't really see that that'll make any difference. That won't make the difference that will, well, that is not the kind of luxury that we have. So that we need to admit, all right, I am capable of totally giving myself to something that I have no way of knowing will turn out the way I want it to. And actually, so that's good to ponder on for just a moment. Because that is always the case in life. That there are no guarantees. When you fall in love with somebody, is there a guarantee that you're going to have a healthy, ongoing relationship forever and ever? Give me a break. I mean, except for rare exceptions. When you go into labor, is there a guarantee that you're going to have a healthy baby? If you plant seeds in the soil, there's no guarantee that there will be enough warmth and moisture and rain for you to have a bumper crop. There's never a guarantee. Life isn't built that way. It just asks us to step forward, knowing that with every step, the journey and the situation looks different. And I often think that if there were a way that I could inject in you, I couldn't, of course, a conviction that, of course, will pull through. There's no question. I have it from the Pleiades or something. There's no question, but we're going to. Would that sense of utter conviction draw from you all the courage and creativity you have? No. It's just that it's being right on the edge, whereas part of it is not comfortable. The situations that generate creativity and courage are never terribly comfortable. But this is our time to shine, guys.
One thing that I find terribly important about this notion of great turning is, with Joanna's 3 circles, is that so many of the activists and NGO leaders that I know and work with, both here and in Russia, really get burned out. They're fighting long battles. You heard this morning how for 8 years they were fighting a battle in court to save the Tongass forest. Well, of course, what it is not a saving, because it'll be reduced the logging, this decision, probably. Well, that's important, but it's not a total solution. It'll still go to corporations to take out logs from there. What I like about this is that those of us who maybe leave the barricades for a while or permanently and go create a Cobb Hill kind of community that Edie's living in of collaborative farming and housing and living sustainably, are in fact fostering the great turning. And those of us sitting here who decide to come for 10 days to change our consciousness and to reinforce our earth consciousness are doing what is essential. I think this is essential work.
And we don't have to argue that it's more essential, because you have to do both, obviously. You have to slow it down. You can't really stop it, but you can slow it down, because slowing it down, or rather slowing down the collapse a little bit, saves some people and saves some life forms and saves some of the gene pool. So this doesn't mean everything's going to be hunky-dory. It means that there's a good chance that life can go on, and that can be for us an exquisite reason to get up every morning. I don't know whether it's to spring from your bed with a smile on your lips, but at least you can get up. What I always like to stress in presenting the great turning is the interdependence of the three dimensions. They reciprocally empower each other. It's not a linear sequence at all. When I talk to an audience, and it's a big hall that I can't, where drawing on a piece of paper isn't appropriate, I find that I use my body and invite my listeners to do so too. Invite them to experience how our hands can help us remember the first dimension, the most visible dimension of holding actions. Hands representing the ways we are endeavoring to stop or slow down the destruction wrought by the industrial growth society. And then I like to use the forehead to symbolize the ingenuity that we see arising with the multiple Gaian structures and forms and organizing and ways of doing things that are emerging in the second dimension. And then for the third dimension, the shift in consciousness, we can use here the heart-mind, because the mind is located here in some traditions like the Buddhist. And here is this transforming insight that we are living parts of a living planet. I also often like to dramatize the interdependence of these dimensions by story and by telling, for example, how activists have taken risks to protect a life form, a part of the living planet, a classic case of holding action, and found that this had triggered in them an awakening, a shift in consciousness. In doing this, I often tell the story of Julia Butterfly Hill, who, as you may know, went up 150 feet to sit in a tree, Luna, a redwood, to protect it from illegal logging. But she didn't stay 2 weeks. She stayed over 2 years. And in addition to saving that one tree, she saved a grove. In addition to that, she enabled countless numbers, hundreds of thousands of young people, people of all ages, to make a shift in consciousness, because you see, she got adopted by that tree. And through her cell phone and speaking on the radio to which it was hooked up, she began to teach in unforgettable ways about the sacredness of all life. Another example I like to give is that of John Seed, my rainforest activist friend in Australia. A turning point in his life was when he took action with some fellow farmers to stand in protection of a remaining vestige of the ancient forests of Gondwanaland when there was illegal logging taking place. And he stood with his back to the trees to protect them from the chainsaws and the police with their bullhorns and paddy wagons to reinforce the illegal logging. And it was truly a holding action. They were just buying time until they could get an injunction for an environmental impact statement down in the provincial courts in Sydney. But there was that moment when all of a sudden he had a shift in identity, a kind of epiphany. He said he realized that he wasn't anymore just John Seed protecting the rainforest, but that he was the rainforest protecting herself through this little piece of humanity that the rainforest had cradled into being. You see the difference that that can make? Let me also say, as a second point, that often after presenting this view of the Great Turning, I give the workshop participants the opportunity to digest it further in terms of their own lives by speaking. So here, open sentences is really helpful. And there are 3 that I like to use: getting people into pairs, asking partner A to begin. First one I like to use of the 3 is to be alive in this time of global crisis. What's hard for me is, you see, this gives people a chance to say what they so often don't give themselves a chance to say, to express some of their anguish. And then second sentence, what I appreciate about living in this time of crisis is, I love that too, because it just turns things upside down in a very creative way, shaking people loose to see all that can unfold. And then thirdly, as I look at my life, these are the ways I see myself taking part in the great turning.